This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
I just love feeding people. I love the gesture of cooking. I love how food levels people. Didn't matter who Lady Gaga was either. You know, when she was eating like marron and oysters with me at the table, you're the same person. It doesn't matter who you are. And that's what I like about eating and food.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Taking a risk and backing yourself can create the most incredible experiences and opportunities. While working as a chef, Amy Hamilton stopped into Albany on the far tip of the south coast of Western Australia for what she thought was a quick visit. But realising its beauty and keen to find a greater connection, she rolled the dice and took a chance to build a restaurant of her own. 7 years on, and she's created one of Australia's most celebrated and unique regional restaurants. Amy, Albany is a long way from just about everywhere. What's it like running a restaurant in such a remote location?
Rewarding, sometimes isolated. Look, I've had Liberté for 7 years now, which sometimes feels like forever. And sometimes it feels like, a very short amount of time. So ultimately, I don't feel like the story has ended for me yet. There's definitely been challenges, but I think those challenges would be and are there with anyone that's running a restaurant.
There's often a romantic notion of when you have a restaurant in the country, you've got a real connection with local producers. Is that the case in Albany? Is there some great producers there that you connect with?
Yeah, there's definitely great producers. I mean, I've said this before, but the producers down here were definitely one of the catalysts for me, realising I could have a restaurant and kind of tell my story down here. I really love and I engage often with the producers here, and Liberté for me was always going to be like a venue I could, that would allow me to be a voice for those small producers.
Are there any producers that you can tell us about that have been really integral in allowing you to share your vision on the plate?
Yeah, well, I mean, the beauty of using small producers is that you can have a conversation with them and, they can tailor what they do or to work with your vision as well. So, I can contact someone like Steve from Pecan Farms and say, I want to use Serrano chilies. How about it? And he'll go, yeah, okay, I'll grow a field of them for you. Or, or he'll message me and say, hey, I've got like a lot of this at the moment. Can you do something with it? And absolutely. So, you tend to, it creates, it sometimes can, it generates like originality in the sense that you're creating dishes based on what's available, which is quite exciting.
Do you have any connections with local pig farmers that you work with?
So I've used, there's a couple of producers. So I've worked a lot with Linley Valley Pork because I was a PorkStar. I mean, before I was a PorkStar in 2018, I've always been a fan of the product there. There's a farm in the Porongurups, free range farm that they've got up there, and I've always really liked the product. I've worked with the Geroviches, who have they've been pig farmers for over 30 years, and they started off with Ray Gerovich, and now it's his son Ivan, and wife Shannon, and they have Dr. Goodness free range pork, and and Plantagenet pork as well.
Tell us about that Dr. Goodness pork. What is it that's so special about the environment that the pigs are in that makes the pork so good?
It's just they're completely free range, and they will often get a lot of scraps from, like the byproduct of other farming. So, just really good quality vegetables, and, they're under carry trees, and it's just a pristine environment. And I think that when that occurs, that, like any good product that's in a good environment, that's reflected in the quality of the meat.
How important is pork in regards to what you do with that sort of French and Vietnamese influence on the menu that you have?
Yeah, well, I've definitely used a lot of pork in different expressions throughout the years. So I'm always really interested and excited by using, I suppose, like the weight, not the waste products of pork, but like, the cuts of pork that other people maybe don't want to use. And I've always had a bit of a ambition to kind of show people in Albany that these other parts of the pork can be really tasty. I mean, saying that, I have had my pork belly dish has been on the menu for 7 years, and it's changed, and it's I can't take it off because, I mean, obviously people love pork belly, so we have a lemongrass brined pork belly that we brine overnight. It's actually the recipe, the brine recipe, was kind of comes from the Thomas Keller. Thomas Keller has a really great brine that he uses for his chicken, for his buttermilk fried chicken, and it's like a lemon and thyme brine. And so I kind of took the idea of that and used lemongrass instead, fish sauce in the brine. So we like brine the pork belly, press it overnight, and then fry it on its skin to order. And I've had that on since day one, and I think we've sold like 12,000 serves of it, so that's about 2 tons of pork belly. And I've tried to put on other cuts, but they've never been as successful because, sometimes your customers really dictate what's on your menu more than you realise. Saying that, I've also, because we trim that pork up, one of the best dishes I did came from the waste of that product. So we trim it up into these like long kind of fingers, and we'd often have all this kind of these edge bits left over with the skin. And so we take the meat and we use them in dumplings, the leftover scraps. But one day I was looking at the skin and I thought, this skin is such a nice texture because it's, it's steamed, but it's like slippery, just like a noodle. So I thought, why don't I just scrape off the fat from this skin and cut them into noodles. And so I ended up doing a dish called pork skin noodles, and we do it with like the same sauce that's kind of on our, our kind of famous crack noodle dish. It's like a very tamarind heavy, Maggi kind of chili garlic sauce. And we've had that with yabbies, and that's, it's great.
What are those other cuts of pork that you're talking about, and what did you do with them?
Oh, like I've done like a chop. I've done kind of, there's that kind of classic Vietnamese like pork chop dish. I've done things like that. But probably the more interesting things that I've done would be like a sour fermented, like it's quite common in Thai and Vietnamese cooking. It's like a fresh fermented sour sausage. Nem Nong, which I've served before, which is great. We've done a lot of quite a broad range of charcuterie at Liberté, and I think a lot of that comes back from my also helping to have that influence from Must Wine Bar back in the day, because I worked with Andre Mahi, who was a great charcutier, and so I've done like head cheese before as well, which you don't really write that on the menu because it sounds kind of gross, but I've also a lot of terrines with pork, rillettes. I did a terrine recently for Taste Great Southern, and I had some Lindley Valley pork, and I used shoulder and minced up some pork and cut up the skin into little tiny cubes and mixed that with cloudier mushrooms, vermicelli noodles, and stuffed it inside of squid tubes, and then cooked that terrine inside that squid tube and then sliced it, which was really good.
Wow. You briefly mentioned a Must Wine Bar. Take us back to that time. That was your first step into the hospitality sector. What was it that lured you into the industry?
Well, like I've said before, it was a complete accident, and I was just a broke student wanting a job and naively thought that I could get a job washing dishes. And the moment I stepped into that kitchen, I just remember thinking, this is awesome. Like, I just love the ferocity and the pace of the kitchen and just the people in it. I liked the fact that it was creative and fast paced, and yeah, that was really kind of it for me. I kind of satisfied, all the areas of my, my interests that I thought I wanted to do. Like, I wanted to do art and I wanted to teach, and, I found that I could satisfy, a lot of that within a kitchen. And yeah, it just kind of became, kind of addictive. I never left.
You did your apprenticeship with Russell Blakey. Do you have any stories of that time working with him and the influence that he had?
Yeah, well, Russell obviously is very dear to me in the sense that he was a great mentor. And, when I went into that kitchen, I knew nothing about food, nothing. And I was older. I was 21 when I started there, and I was a kitchen hand for the first, 2 years. And so I didn't start formally cooking until, I was about 23. And Russell just was a great guy, and so was Andre. And Andre was in the kitchen a lot as well. Russell was too back then. He was there, every day. And I guess what I learned from Russell is to respect an ingredient and to have restraint. Like, sometimes dishes are more powerful when you say less. And also just in the way he treated people, because, around that time there was that kind of culture of, like Gordon Ramsay and, that kind of fear-based kitchen. And, Russell never yelled at anyone, and yet he had immense power and respect in what he didn't say. And I think that that's something I've taken down the line, is that, fear-based kitchens just really aren't that cool. And you don't really get the respect and loyalty from your staff when you're an asshole.
You spent a bit of time in Melbourne as well. What sort of impact did that have on your career?
Yeah, well, Melbourne was intense because obviously I'd come from, the Perth dining scene at that time was definitely gaining like traction. But yeah, Melbourne to me was, I'd never worked so hard in my life. And I wasn't there long. I was only there, under a year, but I worked the whole time under Ricardo Mamezzo, who at the time had just started doing the building. He had a restaurant, SOS, which was a Paul Mathis venture, and it was in this kind of weird location. It was kind of like at the top of an escalator in a shopping centre, and it was a veg aquarium restaurant, which was the first of its kind in Melbourne at the time, but also strange because Ricardo obviously is Calabrian and should be eating and cooking pig. And it's funny because some of my fondest memories, he was an amazing chef in terms of, he had magic hands, the way he plated things and just the way he extracted flavours. And he taught me a lot about extracting flavour at every level in a dish. We never wrote, we never had recipes. He'd just pull you next to him and say, watch. And he'd make this dish and you'd just watch. And then I'd go away and write it down. So yeah, he was an amazing chef. But some of my fondest memories from that kitchen were actually when it was in his private life, when his family were actually slaughtering the pigs and making the salami. And of course I wasn't allowed to come because I was a female, but a couple of the guys in the kitchen were allowed to go. But saying that, a couple of days later, he came into the kitchen with a cake, and it was a sponge cake, and there was like a red jam filling through the middle. And he said to me, Amy, I want you to taste this. And it was actually a sponge cake made with pig jam blood. Yeah, and it was amazing. Yeah, so I never forget that. And he also, he cooked. He brought in bits of the pig, and I just thought, wow, this is the kind of food you should be cooking.
How did you find yourself in Albany?
Well, so after Melbourne, I mean, to be fair, I felt pretty burnt out. And I just remember thinking, I could go on and I could travel overseas. And this was like before children. So there was an opportunity to do that. And to be honest, I just wanted to go home. But I didn't want to go back to Perth. So my partner at the time, his mum lived in Albany. And so we were driving back to Perth, kind of en route to Perth through, down the bottom of Australia. And we stopped in at Albany to see my partner at the time's mum, and just only we're going to stay a week. And I've ended up being here for 12 years now.
What was it about Albany that made you stay there?
I think it was the opportunity. And I think it was I just really felt a connection to Albany. I just loved everything about the landscape. I loved the climate. I loved the topography. And I loved the produce. Everywhere in Albany there's a view, like of the ocean or of something beautiful. And, it's not overly crowded, and you can walk on a beach sometimes and there's no one there. And I've never wanted to be someone that spends 2 hours a day sitting in congested traffic on a freeway listening to shitty radio. To me, it takes me 10 minutes to get to work on a busy day. And I love that. And it was around that time I started feeling this urge to, my biological clock got the better of me, put it that way. And I wanted to have children or a child. And I just felt like Albany was a really safe place and a beautiful place to raise a child and to also cook.
Well, Liberté's influence is incredible, which I want to get into. But one of the interesting things that you've done over your career is being a private chef for the likes of Lady Gaga. Do you have any stories about that experience?
Yeah, that was crazy. And looking back, that was in 2008. So I was a new mother. I had a year-old baby, and it was at a point in my life where I had been cooking in Albany, but then I thought, can I be a chef and be a mother at the same time? Is it too hard? How am I going to do this? And so I ended up finishing my degree online. My teaching degree, which I've never used, and and while I wasn't cooking, I had an absolute compulsion to cook at home. It's kind of like when I think you're a cook, because when you don't do it, it's all you seem to be doing. And so I had a food blog, and I was cooking all the time. And then someone reached out through my mum and said, "Hey, I take care of this place, this private retreat on this beautiful hill in Nannarup overlooking the ocean, which is a house owned by a famous an Albany famous millionaire guy called Paul Terry. And it's this incredible house, and now it gets rented out for private guests. And we need a chef. And, I heard your daughter's a chef. Would she be interested?" So I kind of went, sure, I'll do a gig. And that ended up in me doing quite a few gigs. And then, of course, because it's such a lucrative place, obviously it has these VIP clients. And it literally was one night, the manager rang and she said, "Amy, we've got a VIP client coming in a few days. And, I can't tell you who it is, but it's pretty big. And if we send you a list of things that they want to eat, can you find these things and look after them for 5 days?" And so I said, sure. And so I got this list of things that this person liked to eat, and basically I was to live there the whole time. I went home at night time, but basically would get there at 6 a.m. for breakfast, and then lunch, and then dinner. And the morning that I rocked up, yeah, the morning I rocked up, I walked into Maitreya and Lady Gaga was sitting out on the porch with a Coke can in her hair and wrapped up like a curl in her hair. And she walked up to me. She shook my hand. She never forgot my name. She was absolutely gorgeous. And I had to sign a massive confidentiality agreement. It was like the size of a dictionary. So I couldn't talk about it for a long time, or I was too scared to. But there's nothing bad to report. She, and the first thing I made her was scrambled eggs because she wanted bacon and eggs, and she has her eggs scrambled. And she shouted out to the fly screen. She's like, "These eggs are fucking great." And it was an amazing time. I hired a little wood-fired pizza oven, and we taught her, because my partner was with me as well, who's a chef, and we taught her how to make wood-fired pizza. She wanted to eat marron. We ate oysters. She ate oysters. She showed me how to cook pasta. So she said, "I've got a couple of favourite pasta dishes. Can I cook them for you?" Sure. So she cooked like a really beautiful, simple, because obviously she's Italian American. She cooked this dish of like just whole tomatoes boiled down in a pot with lots of like fennel seed and fresh fennel, and then that just literally stirred that through pasta. And then she wanted to do one with chicory and pine nuts, and yeah, she was great. There's lots of interesting stories. She wanted to watch an Australian movie and one that was really scary, and what would I suggest? And of course I'm like, well, you need to watch Wolf Creek. So we went and got her Wolf Creek from the local video store and we made her a big ice cream sundae. Like she wanted a big like ice cream trolley with like lollies and stuff. And we made that for her. She was great. Yeah. It was a really surreal time. Like we'd go home at the end of the night and I just remember all I wanted though was to be back with my daughter because I was just missing her so much because she was so little, and I'd get home and be so relieved to have her and to be holding her, but then I'd look at my partner and just go, what the hell's happened today? Like we're in Albany and we've just been like hanging out with Lady Gaga and she's been talking about Beyonce and like showing us her new telephone film clip, and her backup dancers were there and they'd break into dance and her dad was there. It was crazy.
Have you actually seen her perform?
No, but she did actually invite us on the last day. She said, "What are you doing? Like tonight, you can come on the private jet with us if you want and come to the concert backstage." And I just was like, I just wanted to see my daughter. So I was like, that's a really nice offer, thank you, but no thanks.
That is extraordinary. Tell us about Liberté. You bought an incredible old or took over an incredible old building and created something quite special. What's the ride been like?
The ride has been it's been incredible. It's been tumultuous. It's been a lesson in how not to run a restaurant at times, and a lesson in I don't know. I always say like having a restaurant is kind of like having a baby. It's kind of like when you have this baby and you look at it and you think, oh my God, what have I done? And then, you look back 6 months later and a year later and you're doing it. You're just doing it. And I was thinking the other day when we had our 7th birthday, I thought, I don't know how I found the strength in me to even think I could do something like Liberté. And I don't know sometimes how I started it or how I had the gumption to do it, but I just did. And I'm so glad because there's been so many amazing people that I've met through that experience and so many great experiences. I've worked with so many great chefs there with events, and just there's memories there I'll have for life with the staff that have been there, and it's it's a little bit of a surreal situation too. Like I look back and I think, wow, we've achieved like some really cool shit. And at the time, like when it happens, sometimes it's so overwhelming that you don't even notice, or maybe you're too busy like wondering where you're going to find 30 grand to pay this and that tomorrow, so it's hard to take in these successes. But we have achieved a lot, and I'm really thankful that the people in the industry have embraced us and accepted us, because it's not perfect at times, and like sometimes in restaurants you do get sick of it. It's like a relationship. It's kind of like there's like highs and lows, and there's periods where you can't be bothered, and sometimes it's hard to come up with new dishes, or customers lock you into this menu so much that it's hard to like flex a creative muscle as much as you want, and sometimes you just don't want to. But yeah, it definitely has been a really fun journey.
Tell us about that decision process that you made to create this Parisian Vietnamese influenced establishment in regional Australia.
Well, I just, after working as a head chef at a kind of a beachside, pub kind of restaurant, and working for someone else, I kind of got to that point where I thought, you know what, I'd like to do it on my own terms and to cook the food I really want to cook, because I think at the end of the day, doing the food for someone else, I lacked authenticity, and I had enough confidence in myself at that point to know that I could cook something that people might want to eat. And, Liberté, already the name of the business and the kind of, or the style that the business already had, set that groundwork for me to make a kind of transition, because it was, obviously French looking, very French, Parisian, Baroque style, space. And so I thought, okay, I'll go in there and I'll do what I know, and I won't do anything too avant-garde. I'll just do like a modern take on the French bistro, And I did, the very first Liberté menu was that. And then I just remember thinking, this is great, but I don't know, it lacked something for me. And it wasn't until Russell, my old boss, came for Taste Great Southern, and he said, let's do an event together. And I think really he was just doing that to help promote me. And, you choose what we do, because he's always trusted my ideas in that sense. And so I thought about it. And I thought, well, how about we do because I really wanted in Albany a really, Southeast Asian, angle going on. I wanted something fresh and I wanted something vibrant, and I knew I had the producers around me to do that. And so I kind of said, well, why don't we do a long table, French Vietnamese thing? And he said, yeah, okay. And so we did that, and I designed this menu with garlic and chili cockles, with samphire, and we did crumbed crab rice paper rolls, and lots of full Vietnamese French kind of stuff. And it was so successful and so exciting to me, and I just thought, oh, this is where I need to be going. And so that's from then, that's what I did.
What have been some of the challenges in diving into that cuisine while you had a restaurant running?
It's mainly people's perception of fusion food, I suppose. Maybe that's my own fear, because I never fusion was a really dirty word for a long time, I think, in the dining scene. And it's kind of I never wanted to be that white girl cooking Asian food and doing it badly. And so I really wanted to do justice to both of those amazing cuisines. And French Vietnamese is the kind of ultimate fusion food in a way. And I suppose the other problem I was worried about initially was just the general public getting it, because at the time the only places around were doing very traditional kind of old school Mediterranean and steak sandwiches and very classic pub food. And so here I am coming in to do French Vietnamese, pork and peanut terrine, and it's pho, and so it was a bit of a risk. And I thought, oh no, this could go so badly, but it went quite well. Because I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing that I like to achieve with my food is accessibility. And I don't spend a lot of time. I mean, I like food to look beautiful, but it's more important for me to make it taste beautiful. And I think that most people, even if they don't understand what they're eating, if you present it to them in an accessible way, that's half the work done. And then they eat it and go, you know what, this tastes great. I don't care what it is.
Was there a moment in time when you felt you'd got a handle on the cuisine and also consumers had really embraced what you were doing?
Yeah, well, I think that kind of started when we got reviewed in the very early days. So Max van Huysen came in just he was down for Taste Great Southern, and he just wandered in. And it was funny because back in the early days, I said to my front of house, here's a photo of Rob Broadfield and here's a photo of Max. And there was no photos of Max at the time. There was one sketchy low pixel photo of him on the internet playing poker. And and I'll never forget, I was in the kitchen, and back in those days it was just me and my apprentice in the kitchen, and we were there all the time. And Karen, my manager, she kind of came in and she said, "Hey, Hammer, there's a guy out there, and I think he might be the guy you showed me in that photo." And I said, "Oh, really?" She's like, "Yeah, he's liking the charcuterie though." And I'm like, "Oh, what? You've already?" Oh, and so he'd already been eating it. And she's like, "Yeah, he's taking photos and stuff." And I was like, "Oh, great." And so that was Max, and Max ended up writing a really great little review based on what he ate. And I think Max is great because he's always seen the potential in people, and that's what makes him a really great food, critic, because he's really great at supporting people where he feels, like they've got some promise. And so Max has been a great, advocate of ours. And then Rob Broadfield came in by complete accident because he was down here doing a review of the region, and he said on Twitter, "Where should I eat?" And 8 people had said, "Go to Liberté." And so he remembered Liberté as the dive it used to be the year before. I think he called it a rat with fleas in his last review. And so he came in and had an old fashioned at the bar and was like, "Holy shit, what is this?" It's an old fashioned with proper ice and what good dilution, and there's linen napkins, and apparently he had you can read it in the review. He has the pork and peanut terrine, and he says to the waitress at the time, he said something like, my try-hard chef-o-meter went off the Richter when he saw pork and peanut terrine, and he asked the waitress, "What's going on with this?" And she said, "Oh, the chef's doing a French Vietnamese thing." And then he went, "Ah," and he tried it and went, "Holy hell, this actually tastes really good." Had sriracha mustard with it, and and he ate the pork belly and the profiteroles or something, and he raved about us. And it was it was that review really that tipped the scale for us, because there were people coming already, but all the other people that were maybe deciding to or deciding not to then all jumped ship and kind of came. And it's been pretty busy since then.
You make your own charcuterie. What's the secret to really good charcuterie?
I think good meat is a good start. Good quality meat. I think seasoning, good seasoning. With rillettes, for example, if that's not seasoned properly, and it's not cooked properly, it's really just a massive tangled, shitty pork and duck. So. But if you handle it right and you whip the fat back into it properly and you season it properly and you treat it with respect at every step along the way, you'll get a good product. I mean, I think charcuterie, sometimes for me, it's, I shy away from it because I think it's because I'm not a patient person. I like food that's fast, and I'm really impatient. And so charcuterie is ugh, it's going to take ages. But then once I do it, I'm like, "Oh, this is pretty cool, isn't it?" This is what real chefs do. But it's we've definitely had a very wide range of charcuterie dishes on the menu.
A little earlier, you mentioned about the pork skin noodles that you had created with the offcuts. Can you tell us about how you make that and what the dish ended up being?
Originally, that dish came from the pork offcuts from when we do our pressed pork belly. And so we used to hoard all the pork skin and, scrape off the fat with a knife. And then, we've tried lots of things like running it through a pasta machine, but I don't think you get as good a result as when you just use a knife, which my chefs hate. And so, just slicing that pork skin finely with a knife. And the moment that hits the pan, so, that goes in the pan, we just put some garlic and shallot in the pan. And then the moment they go in the pan, because that's already come from a steamed pork belly, they're so unctuous. They're like slippery, like beautiful steamed noodles that still have that, you know, that texture. And then, you know, we've done them with lots of other proteins, but I like using yabbies. So like some local yabbies just halved, or I'll poach them and just take out the tail and chuck them in with watercress and Vietnamese mint and like holy basil. And then, yeah, the sauce. And I always like to add just a little bit of Parmesan at the end of cooking them, because the Parmesan kind of ties it all together. And I remember back in Melbourne, Ricardo used to say to me, because it was that seafood restaurant, he was like, you know, people always say you shouldn't put cheese with seafood. And, you know, bullshit. And he said, you know, my mum always adds a little bit of like Parmesan in to the end when she's emulsifying the seafood pasta, because it's just enough that it rounds it out and gives it just that little bit of umami. And that's kind of where, when you look at the cracked noodle dish we have on and that pork skin noodle dish, that's where the cheese influence comes from, because it's not just the Vietnamese French cheese influence, but it's that pasta and kind of putting the finger up to, like, you know, I will be putting cheese with my seafood pasta.
You've had an incredible impact on Albany and WA's food landscape. What is it that you love about what you do?
I just love feeding people. I love the gesture of cooking. I love how food levels people and makes, you know, it doesn't matter who you are. It's, you know, didn't matter who Lady Gaga was either. But when she said my scrambled eggs were fucking great. And, you know, when she was eating like marron and oysters with me at the table, because she'd insist that, you know, sometimes we ate them too, you're the same person. It doesn't matter who you are. And that's what I like about eating and food. And, yeah, having a restaurant's like you're helping people create experiences and memories, and whether that be in the kitchen with the people that you work with day in and day out, or with the people that are coming in and having an experience, I like being able to be part of that.
Well, Amy, as ever, it's always entertaining catching up with you. We've loved having you on the Crackling today to hear some of your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.